Hello and welcome back to the Single Malt Review, where we bring you whiskey reviews from the world over, but usually Scotland. Here's another one.
We have today, it's an oldie but a goodie, Bunnahabhain, 12-year-old. A classic Islay. It's a classically pungent dark green bottle.
Been around for a little while now, has this new vitalised release of Bunnahabhain, but still important, and we haven't covered it, so we thought we might as well get with the program and give you our thoughts on this particular bottling, because it is quite important, even if we're a bit late to the party. I think it was probably sometime around 2010, if not before. I think probably 2010 sounds about right. That Bunnahabhain was, to a certain extent, rebranded, but to the more important extent, re-released as an uncoloured, unchill filtered, and much stronger whiskey. It used to be a very good whiskey, but it used to be a very old-fashioned whiskey in that it was 40%, it was coloured, it was chill filtered, and it was so much less than it could be. It just wasn't as interesting as it is now. And then a very, very good decision was made by goodness knows who at the company. Ian Cloud is the, rather Burn Stewart, I should say. There's just so many owners these days swirling around, it's hard to cotton them down. Burn Stewart is the owner of Bunnahabhain, among a few other Islay distilleries these days. And they made the call that Bunnahabhain was going to get with the program. It was going to be unchill filtered, uncoloured, and it was going to be 46%. Or in this case, 46.3. Who knows where the 0.3 comes from or why, but whatever. It's a bonus. And what it is a remarkably improved whiskey. And quite a unique Islay whiskey, as we're about to find out. Because the first thing you notice as you give it a sniff is it's not particularly peated.
There's very little, possibly none, but I can distinguish on the nose at least.
There's a tang, but there is by no means any kind of dominance. This is a whiskey quite unlike an Ardbeg or a Bowmore or a Colilla or almost anything that goes on in the Isle of Islay, and that makes it fairly unique. This, of course, is their standard release, and it's their most available standard release. So we will see what we can find inside.
That's a curious nose. There's
It
a little
is.
bit of...
It's very tangy, and it's almost a little sour.
There's oddly a hint of roast pork fat somehow. Maybe it's because I had a roast last night, and so nuances are fresh on my mind, but it's a really savoury, very nearly meaty, but not overpoweringly smoked bacon.
It is a little meaty, and I think some of what might be turning you in the direction of roast pork is the herbal quality that this has. There is no small amount of sage and thyme that comes out of this whiskey. Quite a lot of green herbs going on, which is really quite unusual for Islay. Islay whiskies normally, they'll taste of roast pork, but they'll taste of the entire smoked pig. You'll get actual smoky bacon in the whiskey, which is some people's cup of tea and not others. But this one, a little more herbaceous than that. And as I said, deeply, deeply tangy, just slightly sour, very salty, but not particularly smoky. Only smoky as a suggestion, not an outright claim. And that's the palate. So let's see what's on the, or rather the nose, I should say. Let's see what's on the palate.
That's where the peat has been hiding. It's not overpowering, but it's a fair wall. It lets you know it's there. There is peat, there is iodine, there's a bit of sea salt.
It's certainly more obvious, but it's still brinier than it is smoky.
There's some leafy green veg there, like some silver beet or spinach, somehow.
The herbaceous character rather continues in the palate, which takes it further and further away from the norm of Islay whiskies. It really is something quite different, which is a fairly risky proposition if you're an Islay distiller. Most people come to Islay whiskies for one thing and one thing alone, which is peat. Because that's where you find the peat. Why would you not come to Islay were it not for a peated whiskey? So I think in putting out a whiskey like this, a balanced, subtle whiskey, Islay is, or rather Bunnahabhain I should say, is walking a slightly dangerous line in alienating some of the maybe less discerning peat heads, because what they'll find here is probably not what they were looking for if they were simply reaching to Islay as they would reach towards a guaranteed peaty whiskey, because this is not. But if you look at it a little more in a bit of come from a more complex place to it, like we try to do here at the Single Malt Review, and how I think an increasing number of single malt drinkers are these days, they'll find something tremendously worthwhile, something that's not your standard Islay whiskey, but something that's a little bit more than your standard Islay whiskey. And I think there's tremendous value
I, for one,
in that.
admire the idea of a less peated Islay whiskey. Because so often some of the heavier peated Islay whiskies have a lot of flavour, but it's always shrouded behind what is to me an impenetrable pea soup fog of peat fumes.
They
And I
can be
wonder,
very
what would this
difficult
be
to
like?
see.
What actually does it actually taste like underneath all that peat? And thanks to this, we get a chance to try a 100% Islay whiskey.
There's two
without
ways.
peat.
There's two ways you can do that. You can wait 30 years and take out a second mortgage to find out what was underneath the peat. But a bit faster and a bit cheaper is these whiskies like Bunnahabhain, or the occasional less peated or even unpeated Bowmore, other things that you normally have to go to independent bottles for. And what you find is that Islay does have a character all of its own despite the peat. Take the peat away and Islay still has its own perfectly individual character. It's just a bit more interesting and it's a bit more complex than you're normally used to finding, because you're normally used to finding all that peat. And what's underneath normally goes not forgotten, but certainly less heard than otherwise would. And it's whiskies like this which show you what's really going on under the hood of Islay distillation, and so I think they're very valuable in that respect.
And what's really going on in this case is, for me, a square meal of a whiskey. It's like mussels with a side of greens. It's curiously maritime, but also
It's very, very
herbaceous.
complete. It's a whiskey that, did you have to pick one to serve, be it a dinner, a wedding, whatever you had, if you were allowed one whiskey, this would be one of the candidates, because it does come at everything at every different angle. It really suits all tastes. I think you'd have to find a very, very fussy person that didn't find something to like in this particular whiskey. And on the other hand, it doesn't bring anything in such intensity that it will put anyone off. There's no one dominant flavour here that's going to scare anyone
Yeah, it doesn't
away from drinking it.
bombard you with peat, but it's also not devoid of peat too. So if someone likes a bit of a peat, then they're not going to be left out either.
I think initially I thought this was a primarily bourbon matured whiskey, but as an uncoloured whiskey, I'll give you a little bit of close up here to see the colour as best I can. There is a significant portion of sherry in there, more than I was expecting from the 12 years old. I think that's running very, very close to 50-50. The 18 years old, which is also excellent, we don't have a bottle of that just at the moment. We may have to get our hands on one to close the loop on this Bunnahabhain release, but that one is much closer to 100% sherry matured, and so that's probably the one to go for if you're really, really into your sherries. However, if you're into your whiskey, like we're into our whiskey, this is really something quite unmissable. It's nothing new. You'll find a great many reviews of this one out there already, because it's been around for a long time. It's become something of a standby, but you'll find, I think, that they're all pretty solid reviews, because this is a very, very solid whiskey. It's one of the real standbys in the everlasting whiskey cabinet of things to pick from, and I don't think any collection should be really without this one. I think that would be quite remiss, and it's on top of that really pretty affordable. They've pitched it at a good sort of median level for what's affordable and what's not, and needless to say, anyone that wants a bottle of Bunnahabhain 12 can get a bottle of Bunnahabhain 12, and so of that I would really quite recommend. As for scores, it's always so difficult to assign a score to a complex whiskey like this in a short video, but have you got some sort of number for me?
This whiskey is a guaranteed crowd pleaser, but without appealing to the lowest common denominator. It's one that pretty much anyone who might enjoy a dram or get on board with. It doesn't achieve that by going for an overpoweringly sweet or cloying angle. So, yeah, it's well-rounded. It's open to all palates, all impressions. And this one ranks an 88 for me.
I think that's just about right. It'll be a rare instance where we've gotten exactly the same score. This is an 88 for me as well. For an entry-level whiskey, because this is the bottom of their range, they come out with a 12-year-old. They do no younger whiskey than that, except for their heavily peated Torfa, which is pretty good if you want a very, very young, very, very peated whiskey. I think there might be slightly more affordable examples out there if you want something that simple, but no, I think 88 is a good place for this whiskey, and when you look at its price point, that's a tremendously strong score for what is arguably a tremendously strong whiskey. Peat lovers may grumble at this one because it's not displaying the true Islay style, but whiskey lovers will appreciate this whiskey as we do. So if you haven't tried it, which is probably a fairly slim minority now, then I really, really recommend to go and have a look, because not only is it a really good standby, it's something that's maintained beautiful consistency over the years, because ever since this was re-released as such a strong thing, it really hasn't changed. It's as good as it was, and that cannot be said for every single whiskey series that's out there. This has not run into consistency problems as other things have, particularly other Islay-based things, of which I will say no more. But there we go. Bunnahabhain, 12-year-old, there is the verdict, an 88 all around. I won't even have to put two separate score sheets in there. I'll just move it into the middle or something like that. It'll be very, very esoteric. Anyway, in the meantime, keep safe. Slanger. This has been the Single Malt Review.